and I will be the facilitator today. As you note in the chat box, that this meeting, the Governor's Advisory Council meetings are open to the public and are recorded. The recording is accessible on the Advisory Council website 1 week after the meeting, and you can opt out of the recording by exiting the meeting at any time. So welcome, and today we're going to start off with a welcome from our co-chairs, and noting that Commissioner Daubenberger is unable to be here at the beginning of the meeting, but hopefully will be able to join later on. So I will turn to our co-chair, Phil Magny, to kick off the meeting. Phil.
Good morning. Thank you, Ben. Good morning, everyone. You can hear me okay, correct?
Yes, we can.
I can. Yep.
Am I unmuted? Okay, cool. Okay. Anyway, good to be back. Hope everybody is having a terrific summer so far. Obviously, it's kicked off with a vengeance yesterday. Kind of nice, actually, but it was rather sweaty, to say the least. With respect to this meeting, we have several exciting topics to present to you. I think you'll find them very interesting. For example, we're going to, a little bit later, we're going to talk about the Drive Minnesota. This is a very exciting event coming up. We'll fill you in on with the details, but basically it's a 1,000-mile tour through the state, and this is something that at VSI we've been doing for a few years now. We're happy to bring this show here in our own backyard. It takes place in mid-August. What's exciting is this is going to be coupled with our AV Readiness Survey, the VSI AV Readiness Survey, where we are able to collect data and analyze that data and highlight the overall routes compatibility for CAV technologies. So that's pretty exciting. Be very good insight for everybody. On a related note, some of us are gearing up for ITS World Congress. As you know, Kristen White is very involved in that, and she's made arrangements for VSI Labs to really unveil for the first time its AV Readiness Survey along with the Utah DOT. So that's going to be terrific to be part of that event. And lastly, we're going to talk about some of the recommendations, some of the council recommendations, which we've been working on as a group now for some time. And I just want to say that it's really the Innovation Alliance committees have really been instrumental in that process. It's just terrific how these individual groups have been able to come together with some specific recommendations, which we will be talking about shortly. So with that, Ben, back to you, I guess.
Well, thank you, Phil. And you gave a highlight of actually what's coming today's meeting. So just to kind of give a little bit more on the agenda, in addition to all the updates and information sharing that Phil highlighted, and he did mention that number 3, which is the draft recommendations review. Just wanted to point out that one in particular, because that will be the bulk of our meeting today, noting that at the last Governor's Advisory Council meeting, there was the discussion of being able to formulate those recommendations with more of a fine point. And the folks who've been working on that in the ad hoc group will be presenting that work today for discussion, and noting how that will be then incorporated into the annual report that Tara will be talking more about later. So with that, we will go into our roll call. And it was noted at the last meeting, but wanted to say that we have a new official co-chair of the council, with Nancy Daubenberger now as full commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Transportation. So hearty congratulations to her as I mentioned, she'll be joining us later on in today's meeting. She had a conflict and she will attend when she is able to join. So with that, I will go down the list of council members. Just go ahead and come off mute and say that you're here. And for all other participants, if you can just put your name, your role, and your organization in the chat box, just to note who all is here, that would be great. All right, so we'll start off with Amber Backus.
Good morning, I'm here, thank you.
Good morning, welcome. Dan Chen from 3M.
Morning, I'm here.
Hi, Dan. Brian Daniel.
Good morning, Ryan here.
Welcome. Danielle Elkins.
Good morning, Danielle here.
Great, glad you're here. Michael Gorman.
Hi, good morning. Michael's here.
Good morning, Michael. John Housladen.
Big 10-4, John's here.
All right, great. Phil is here. Welcome, Phil. Thanks for kicking us off. Myrna Peterson. Okay, not hearing anything from Myrna. We can circle back. Damian Reel.
Good morning.
Good morning, Damian. Vicki Rizzolo.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. And then I think Gina Boss from Minnesota, the University of Minnesota CTS is here in place of Kyle Shelton. Is that correct?
Yes. Good morning, Ben. I'm here.
Good morning, Gina. Thanks for joining and stepping in for Kyle today. Brett Weiss. Okay, we're waiting on Brett. And then Patrick Weldon.
Good morning here.
Welcome, Patrick. Glad you're here. Okay, well, with that, again, if you are, if you're not a council member but are participating today, please, in your attending today's meeting, please go ahead and put your name, role, and organization in the chat box. I did want to note that today, especially the discussion portions of the meeting are for council members and ex officio members. All other participants today, we do reserve a public comment period at the end of the meeting. So if you would like to comment or use that time, we just ask that you let us know in advance if you can, and if not, we will still open it up for comment at the end, just so we kind of have an idea of how many people would like to use that time. Okay, well, I'll turn it back to Tara. Welcome, everyone.
All right, thanks, Ben. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of what we covered at our last meeting. Don't want to take too much time on this, as I know we have a packed agenda, as you can see. We have some really good discussions we're hoping to have with everybody. So just wanted to remind folks that at our last meeting, we went over the Governor's Advisory Council annual report. So that's due to the governor every February. So we got a little bit of an extension this last year due to some of the challenges that we had to make sure that we could get that completed on behalf of the council for them. So we'll be looking at getting the council more involved this year. So hopefully later this fall, you'll hear some opportunities to maybe help us figure out what some of the content we want to make sure we're including in that report it will be. Also, Ben mentioned that we have the recommendations that we're working on today. Those will be included in the executive report. So we're actually doing a 2022 executive report as well. That will be the formal recommendations to the governor of what should happen to this council following the end of the executive order, which will expire in April of 2023. We also talked a little bit about the IIJA workshop that we had in February. So keeping an eye on some notice of funding opportunities through federal funding. So I'll give a little update on that here shortly as well. And then we, the main majority of the meeting was talking about the recommendations for the council. So we reviewed the 2018 executive report that was supposed to be kind of our guiding document as a council of what we should be working on, how we can move forward and prepare for CAV, and really made some good headway on what we wanted to include for our 2022 recommendations from the council. So we look forward to continuing that conversation today and sharing some more information and hopefully getting to a point where we're finalizing those and able to formalize them in a report for the governor. So with that, I'll kick off the first agenda point on our meeting, which is the IIJA Notice of Funding Opportunities. I'm going to put a link in the chat box here, so feel free to go ahead and click it while you're listening to me speak as well. So just give me 1 second so I can get that. This is a website that shares some information about future funding opportunities that are coming out through the federal government, particularly that are in IIJA. And one of them that we wanted to particularly highlight in general is the SMART grant program. So that's strengthening mobility and revolutionizing transportation. And we're expecting to see this opening in September. So with that, I wanted to make sure folks are aware of this grant in particular, because there's, you can see $500 million that is funded for this at the federal level. It's unsure exactly how long it'll be available, essentially just until it's expended. But typically when we have these federal opportunities, we have about 30 to 60 days, depending on the program, to put together an application. I'm not going to lie, I'm not an expert in putting together these types of applications, but it's my understanding that there is a substantial amount of work, and it's really good to have our homework done in advance as opposed to waiting till September to see that official notice to come out. So I wanted to bring this one to our attention to see if there was an opportunity for either the council or maybe the Innovation Alliance committees to start brainstorming some ideas that might be really good options for the state to consider. And I use the word state not as MnDOT, not as the state of Minnesota, but for our state, the population, as this could be a way to hopefully allow other local communities to really utilize this funding to move some of their priorities forward that maybe we can't utilize our trunk highway funding for, which sometimes has some substantial limitations. So this is a new program. Just wanted to highlight some of the eligible recipients. You can see includes states, political subdivisions of states. So that would be our local cities and counties, tribal governments, public transit agencies, public tolls authorities, so we don't have to worry about that one, and metropolitan planning organizations. So with that, a lot of opportunity of who could actually apply for this, but really a great opportunity is to do some potential demonstration projects. You guys know we have our Rochester project, and that will be continuing through August of this year. We have another demonstration project in White Bear Lake, and we just kicked off another project in Grand Rapids that we're hoping to see launch later this fall. So with that, we have opportunities to do demonstration projects, but we know that we're not going to, as a state, be able to fund all the different communities. This is a great funding opportunity that might provide an alternative funding source for some of those other priorities in other communities that we want to make sure we're reaching. So with that, some of the areas that are focused on in this grant include coordinating automation, connected vehicles, intelligent sensor-based infrastructure, systems integration, commerce delivery and logistics, leveraging the use of innovation, aviation technology, smart grid, and smart technology traffic signals. So as you can see, it's broad, but there is just a lot of opportunity here as well. So we're expecting for in the second or third quarter of 2022, the official notice of funding to come out. So I just wanted to take a minute here to pause and see if the council had any recommendations of how they might want to structure some sort of discussion on this. We could form a working group. We could form a working group from the council, as that tends to be a great way to kind of pull in some folks that maybe have some strong ideas and strong thoughts of maybe what we can do. We can utilize our infrastructure investment committee. We can utilize our labor and workforce committee, our outreach and education committee to make some recommendations and potentially identify some communities or agencies that might be able to lead the application process. And so I just want to pause here and see if there's any thoughts.
I have an initial thought that generally one plays to one's strengths, whether it's in employment or the state. Our strength, I guess, is ice and snow, that we have a lot of ice and snow that needs to be taken care of, that maybe the Teslas and the Waymos of the world are not necessarily testing as much in there. I wonder if a smart grant opportunity would be to say, to be able to start a program to encourage the OEMs to be able to test here and maybe have a public-private partnership to be able to do that. That's one idea on grant possibilities.
Thank you, Damien. Got that noted. Danielle.
Probably from the city of Minneapolis perspective, the things that we have the most kind of coming up that we want to test is probably improvements with signal timing, especially around transit and automation around that, since we're already leading on that. But as we're also working to develop a curbside management policy, some of the issues we've been having with like sensors and things along the curb is that they can't handle extreme temperatures or snow plows. And we've had some great discussions with some cities in Finland that are doing really great things in measuring snow depth and things like that. So that's also an opportunity.
I might add, if I may, to Damien's point, one potential way to get more industry would be if we had a rather than essentially saying, look, the state is open and it's great for testing because we have all this ice and snow. If there were a designated area or a corridor, for example, corridors are a very pragmatic and practical way to engage the state, a state in connected and automated vehicles. And as we know, a lot of our neighbors are doing just that. Just an idea.
Thanks, Phil. So any ideas on how we can formalize what maybe the council would want to recommend for a state initiative for a smart grant application? Because the one thing I want to be mindful of, the state of Minnesota, we could apply for a smart grant on behalf of everybody, but I think that from my understanding, talking with our partners at FHWA, applications that are led by local agencies have a lot more support from this administration. So we like the idea of if there's a local community that wants to do something that aligns with the Governor's Advisory Council goals, fits into this program, we would love to see it supported, but we also want to make sure we're creating a support network. So it's not just one person trying to put together a enormous package of information to get that application completed. So from a strategic perspective, any ideas or strong feelings there?
Tara, we're seeing oftentimes when we're engaging with, I would say, city level DOTs and state level DOTs, we're happy to, put together those groups together and just brainstorm solutions. So, I think whether it's be smart grants or S4S grants or what have you, there's a bunch of different things that are happening in the different components. Would be good to just get a working group together just to brainstorm ideas. That's probably in representation from interested communities for this. There's a lot going on. There's a lot that goes into these grants, and happy to have multi-component participation in those. So if you can convene those, be happy to send representatives to that.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that.
Do you know if there's an equity component in this grant at all? Because that's certainly a big push from the administration on most of the transportation funding grants.
I don't have that in my specific notes right here, but I could definitely look into that and find out. I believe, like you've mentioned, most of the grants have some sort of component of that. So looking at specific communities and I think would be an important aspect. But I'll verify that and include that in our meeting summary.
Great, thanks.
Tara, something to just add to the thought mix. And I like the earlier reference to lanes. It's like, where's activity happening? So I'm going to try and connect a couple ideas here. I think one of the real opportunities for connected and automated vehicles as it relates to freight is there's a lot of inefficiency around freight. I'm just going to call them depots, distribution centers. They could be intermodal rail yards. They could literally be a food service, distribution center. But the industry loses a lot of time waiting, and you have these trailers that are often dropped, unhooked, hooked back up, moved around. So there may be an opportunity for like a really closed circuit, localized demonstration of not even the last mile, but the last 100 yards of freight movement. And you could find a partner in a very specific area. Could even be a non-metro county that is right on the border. So just to plant that, is there an opportunity for leveraging freight and sort of that efficiency? Supply chain, such an issue right now. I would plant that. The other thing I would plant is, as we think about winter, continue to think about commercial vehicle deployment in these environments. And there are new challenges, and just the geometry of a large truck going through an intersection or a roundabout is really different when there's snow that's plowed or not been plowed. So I think that's a great test.
Thank you, John. So as you guys have noted, there's a number of different ideas. And the one thing I think we also want to make sure is that we don't submit 10 different ideas from the state of Minnesota. because that tends to be very difficult for the selection folks to decide what is the highest priority. So we want to try to, I think, narrow it down to a couple as well. So Dan, I'll just go back to, you mentioned you think a working group to brainstorm these ideas might be beneficial. So I'll just ask if there's anyone on the council or ex officio members that would be interested in helping brainstorm ideas. I know we'll be able to pull in some folks from Renovation Alliance committees as well. And then we can hopefully try to come up with a strategic plan on the best way to formulate an application for this. So any volunteers that would like to, I'm going to put Dan's name down, even though I think he said maybe they have other folks.
Yeah, that'd be great. Great, thanks, Tara. Sure.
Tara, this is Gina. So I'm going to volunteer Kyle since he's not here, or actually I'll just volunteer CTS that we would be willing to participate in those conversations.
Thanks, Gina.
Tara, count me in on this too, please.
Thanks, Phil.
Sarah, you can add me, Danielle, as well.
Thank you, Danielle. All right. Well, in the interest of time, I am happy to keep us a little bit of ahead of schedule. So if there's anyone else that would like to join that working group as we start to brainstorm ideas and what might the state want to put together for an application, feel free to email me or Thomas Johnson Kaiser of the CAVX office, and we'll make sure we get you added as we start to bring that group together. Our goal would be to try to move this forward pretty quickly so that by the time September rolls around and the official notice comes out, we are in full gear and ready to start an application there. So you'll see in the meeting summary in the email as well that we'll ask for additional volunteers if anyone's interested. All right. Well, with that, Ben, I'm happy to turn it back to you so we can move over to the robust discussion we're hoping to have on our recommendations that we're looking to finalize today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tara. Thanks for that discussion. So what we're going to do now is we're going to spend about an hour on reviewing the draft recommendations that have been developed by the ad hoc group. Thomas Johnson Kaiser will present a little bit of background on the development of these and then turn it over to Damian Reel, who will walk through the different recommendations. What we're asking from you today is to provide some general feedback, especially if there's any major concerns that you have with the recommendations. This is not an approval process today, although if there is consensus that the recommendations are looking good, that's obviously a helpful thing to know as well. At the end of the presentation, Thomas and Tara will explain how these will be incorporated into the report to the governor's office. So Thomas.
Yeah, so just wanted to provide a little bit of background on kind of where these recommendations came from, the purpose of the recommendations, and kind of the process that we went through to develop these draft recommendations. So as a reminder, at our last meeting in March, we reviewed the recommendations from the 2018 executive report. So these recommendations are building off of those 2018 recommendations. So as Tam mentioned before, as this Governor's Advisory Council term is coming to a close with the executive order expiring in April, one of our deliverables will be this 2022 executive report that's going to be shared with the governor. And these recommendations are going to be the main part of that executive report. And the intention for these is to be acted upon by the next council. So it has kind of that 4-year intended timeline for these recommendations. And as I mentioned, we are building off of the 2018 executive report recommendations from these. So we had a working group that was formed from volunteers that participated in the March Governor's Advisory Council meeting. So I want to thank Brett Weiss, Kyle Shelton, Damian Reel, and Phil Magny for volunteering and participating in that working group along with Commissioner Daubenberger. And the group used those 2018 recommendations as a starting point to determine kind of what we want to keep, what we want to change, kind of what do we want to add or remove from those recommendations to develop these draft recommendations that were sent out ahead of the meeting, and we'll dive into shortly here with Damian. Do you want to know we did a slight format change for these recommendations? So there's 12 categories in the recommendations, and each category we have a goal or definition that we wanted to have for the recommendations, can provide that high-level overview of what we're looking at for this category. and there's a few specific recommendations underneath that category. So I just want to thank those working group members again for their participation in helping develop these draft recommendations. And as Ben mentioned in this discussion that Daniel will lead, we're just kind of looking for that high-level feedback. Government Advisory Council members will have an opportunity to provide additional feedback after the meeting if you have it, since there is a lot to go through here in this next hour. So not wanting to wordsmith every recommendation at this meeting here, but provide that high-level feedback. And I do want to note that these recommendations, as I mentioned, will be included in that 2022 executive report, and our plan is to have that draft executive report available to be reviewed and discussed at the September council meeting. And Taylor will talk about the next steps leading up to that at the end of the presentation here. So with that, I will pass it over to Damian.
Great, thanks, Thomas. And as a I guess high-level overview, part of these recommendations are a bit existential. That is to be able to say, what is our purpose of this group and what are the end goals of this group? So that's very high level. And what I'm going through now are kind of the more concrete items, the kind of lessons learned to be able to say, okay, this is what we've learned over the past 4 years, and this is what we might want to learn more about in the coming years. So looking at this first, the first is testing. And Tara, I don't know if this is the most recent version of the deck. It looks like the bolding is not on the left. So as I go through the first slide, I don't know if you or Thomas might be able to find the more recent version that I sent yesterday. So number one is safe testing. So of course, Minnesota's unique use cases include the ice and snow that we described earlier. So potentially there are policies and regulations to be able to relate to those, to the ice and snow that we have here and other unique use cases, whether that's mobility or equity or other things. And then to determine also if we want to be able to say, to be able to work in this state, there are certain testing requirements, whether to operate a vehicle that is a CAV vehicle or whether an OEM would need to do testing requirements. Those are the two items here to be able to say, let's test the vehicles and let's also test the policies and regulations to be able to see if they need to be modified. Any questions or thoughts on this first?
And I'm happy to jump in and say, I think that the council even started to identify some of those unique use cases today. So I think one of the things we'd like to do is be strategic, whether it's the council or an alliance committee, to really spearhead these and make it clear and define them for our state so that we can act on them accordingly.
Great. Looks like Representative Elkins has his hand up.
Yeah, just a little bit of background. I did carry a bill like this for MnDOT in the previous session, and we couldn't get it passed because the Senate insisted that any vehicle that's authorized to be tested on Minnesota roads would first have to be tested off-road, where we know that there's not a whole lot of value in testing this technology on a test track right now, and so MnDOT and I agreed that no, we're better off with no bill at all than a bill that limits the testing to off-road situations. So, but I'm happy to give it another run next year.
Great, thanks, Representative Elkins. Other thoughts or questions on this?
And Damian, correct me if I'm wrong here, but so we have that on the left side of the screen here with that authorize and conduct testing, kind of that main objective we're striving for. But these 3 recommendations are the steps that we think we want to take initially before we actually can achieve that larger objective there that's called out. So Representative Elkins, to your point, there's definitely some resistance and some challenges with getting to that full goal there. And so we were trying to, I think, lay out a little bit more strategic steps for us to take so that we can see that path, and maybe it's in 2 years or even a shorter amount of time, maybe a longer amount of time. That bill might have a little bit more support because of the additional things that we've been able to move forward as a council.
A roadmap to the destination, if you'll excuse the pun.
Excellent, thank you.
John Hustlin.
Yeah, just a quick question. So obviously some time has now passed where more states have been doing more testing. So are we going on some old data and assumptions of what those states had put in place or didn't have in place, or is there a need for refreshing on sort of their statutes and regulations that are just best practices and benchmarks for us? I mean, that's there's sort of, do we want to do it? But is there, I'll say just, is there a quicker path forward now because there's a greater record of on-road testing in other states? And how do we, and is that built into their implied or, thank you.
Yeah, I think that investigation, that question you're asking, I think is the goal of this, is to ask those questions to be able to see if do we do anything or do we not do anything? Have other states testing met our requirements? Have they not met our requirements? So I think your question is exactly the right question to be asking and one that would be investigated if we follow through with this recommendation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts or questions, knowing that this is one of many recommendations? All right. Hearing none, I think we can move on to the next. Next is infrastructure. That is, do we identify what infrastructure, if any, we need to be able to move forward on? And of course, first, with the number two is assessing current infrastructure, figuring out whether partnerships with business need to go forward, and to determine collaboration, whether that needs to be enhanced between state and local agencies, all with the goal of, on the left-hand side, being able to invest in that infrastructure moving forward. Other thoughts on being able to assess and to be able to potentially expand infrastructure? Those, I also lead the Technology and Data Commission, and those, because I co-chair, they know that I have a bachelor's degree in education, so pregnant pauses and uncomfortable pauses are rules of the game for education and for these things. Any thoughts or questions? John?
Yeah, just, I'm assuming prioritize would include crash data. It's implied.
I think it would under maybe others, but this is for infrastructure. I don't know if the crash data would fall under infrastructure or not. Tara or anyone else?
Well, it's where crashes happen. So I'll just layer on. We asked DPS to do a heat map for us to show where all the truck crashes have happened over the last 5 years. And the data was there. And so then it can lead to a conversation and what are the investments from a trucking perspective that say what's unique about these locations. And so I would say that would be part of the analysis. There's always efficiency, but if we have areas that have high crash incidents, that infrastructure changes. I mean, this is I'm thinking of integrated infrastructure, right? The systems, the technology, and the roadbed itself.
Yeah, I think that there's another slide on safety, and I think that in conjunction with this infrastructure probably would be where to do it. Like, what is the safety of the vehicle, and then what is the infrastructure on which that vehicle had a crash? I think that's probably right.
And John, am I hearing you correctly? Also, in the sense that I think, well, let me go back a step. I think when the working group put this one together of identifying and prioritizing infrastructure, they were looking at more, do we prioritize enhanced lane marking on our roadways with the new MnDOT recommendation and guidance? Do we look at making our signs more visible, more reflective? What are those specific infrastructure things that from a state or a local agency we want to throw money at and, you know, be strategic at? But I think what I'm hearing you say is that we can go one further and say, well, where's the crash data that might even be able to tell us where we can make other enhancements from a emerging technology component of infrastructure that would help from that safety aspect. Am I hearing you correctly on that?
Yes, and I do think maybe it's just a bit in, you know, for those of us who lobby, transportation infrastructure is funding and paying for all the stuff, largely roads and bridges, but we're really talking about technology infrastructure, right? Under this slide.
I think it's a little bit of both. I think we were looking at it as, I think, hard infrastructure originally, but I think what I'm hearing you say is maybe there's an opportunity for that technology infrastructure to be ingrained in it. So I think we can definitely make a note on that, though.
Yeah, I don't have a solution. It's just a little, as we're talking, it's unclear where we want to go. So for outward looking presentation, thank you.
That's helpful, John. And knowing we're also in about 4 slides going to be talking about traffic regulations and safety, which also might relate to that. So to the extent there's more discussion, we can maybe do that. Other thoughts on infrastructure before we move to the next?
Just a question on assessment, Damien. This is Dan. Just how we think about assessment. Is it kind of traditional line or equipped trucks driving around, or are there some other things that we're thinking about on assessment point of view?
I think it's vague for to leave room for interpretation. So I think that what you described is probably one assessment. Another is to be able to look at the particular roadways, look at the particular technology, et cetera. So yes, I think that would be included in the vague assessment, vague by design.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Looks like Gina has a question.
Yeah, I was just actually going to follow up on that comment. So when we talk about Drive Minnesota and that initiative, I think it's next on the agenda, we'll start to get at what we're looking at in terms of what we mean by assess the infrastructure and the work that Phil does with his AV readiness survey. So I think that would be a tactic or an action that would support this particular recommendation.
Great. I realize now that we're, I think, 2 or 3 slides in that we talked about in the planning of this that maybe to have interactive, and I guess I'd defer to the group, but we could have 2 methods. We could have essentially opt in to say everyone give a thumbs up if we consent to this slide, or we could just say that silence means consent. Any thoughts on thumbs up, opt in, or opt out? Silence seeks consent. It seems like opt out is working fine, but be happy to entertain option 1 if we'd like. All right, silence, being met with silence, I will interpret that as silence seeds consent. So I think we can move on to the next. Registration. So we've talked previously about the hardware. So this is largely more to the software. That is not even software. The humanware, the wetware, as they sometimes call it, the humans. So do we need to create a designation for newly purchased vehicles that it is automated? And do we incorporate CAV into the instruction for newly licensed or newly permitted people? And if there is licensing changes, perhaps start that conversation with the DMV. Any thoughts on registration, training, and licensing?
And I'll just note too, like what Gina just said with looking at Drive Minnesota, trying to move forward, that assess our infrastructure recommendation. We're not necessarily waiting on these. We're not looking to wait to 2023 to start to take action. So a lot of these ideas were spearheaded by the council or by the Innovation Alliance Committee. So our safety committee led by our co-chairs, Amber Dahlman of MnDOT and Mike Hansen of DPS have been really looking at how to ingrain some sort of automation training or automation information in driver training manuals and figuring out what's the right way, safest, easiest way to do it so that we don't lose the securities that we have in our state that are requiring driver training today.
Great, thanks. Any other thoughts or questions on registration, training, or licensing?
Just a couple of remarks here. I think series production vehicles as we buy them today, I mean, it sure would be in the registration would be vital to know if that vehicle has has a level 1 technology, for example. Does it have adaptive cruise control, for example? Another level 1, does it have an active lane keep assist system? That's 1, 2, a couple examples. And then of course a level 2 system. I think to me that seems like a no-brainer to bake into the vehicle registration. Regarding instruction materials, driver training instruction materials. Oh, okay. Absolutely. That's got to be, a lot of people don't understand how these technologies work or even what they do. So I think that is super critical. And I hope they're teaching this, like, for example, in basic driver training. I don't know if they are. I'm sure they allude to it from time to time. But in any event, it's vitally important. So good stuff here.
Fun fact, Phil, in all of our discussions with our folks from DMV and DPS that run driver training, nothing with automation is included. The last technology that was updated in driver's education is anti-lock brake systems, to give you context of how far maybe we have to come. So yeah, definitely some opportunities to include a little bit more information in there.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to help out here as well.
Excellent. Other thoughts on registration, training, or licensing? All right, hearing none, I think we can move to the next slide. We, throughout the council's history, have talked about equity and accessibility as primary goals. The first is to be able to establish categories of equity, then to research how the users are affected by CAV, be able to determine populations that are either unrepresented or excluded, and then to assess safety inequities. And then, of course, all of this is to further the goal on the left-hand side to advance the policies that promote equity. Any thoughts or questions on accessibility and equity?
Hi, this is Ryan here. I just have a question with regard to 4C. When you say expose underrepresented and historically excluded populations, are we going to do that in forms of like public hearings? Are we going to partner with like other agencies, transportation agencies, nonprofits, etc.? Am I thinking along the right lines there?
That's right. There's going to be a further slide later on that talks about public engagement and education. And so this is almost a subtopic of, we're going to educate the public. And in particular, we'll be educating and exposing underrepresented and historically excluded populations and maybe focus on them in addition to the wider public. So yes, I think the answer to your question is yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts or questions on accessibility and equity? All right, hearing none and knowing that we have lots to go forward, the next is revenue. To the extent we want to talk about creating a public-private working group to relate to revenue and talk about funding for CAV planning and to determine how to diversify funding and potentially supplement it. Of course, everything needs money, and being able to determine how we will fund these initiatives in the future is a goal with this slide. Any thoughts or questions on revenue? Right. I think that pause was uncomfortable enough. I think we can move on to the next, which is traffic regulations and safety. This is talking about ways to be able to reduce injury. This relates to the infrastructure discussion that we had earlier, but this is really focused on the regulatory and the safety aspects. One, to determine crash reports and automation designation in correlation to crash reports, how many level 1 vehicles are getting crashes, level 2s, et cetera. And then to be able to do research on the benefits of CAV. And I would guess inherent in that as research would be benefits and detriments, perhaps, of CAV technologies. And then, well, I guess that's number 3, research about areas of concern related to CAV technologies. Any thoughts on policies, regulations, and research related to regulations and safety?
And again, this is another one where I think there's a lot of support for some of these things. Phil, as you mentioned, it would be great to have some sort of designation and registration regarding if vehicles have ADAS or are level 2. But one of the things that we tried to kind of take a step back, and as we've mentioned earlier, these are a little more high level, a little vague in some fashion, which is a little bit uncomfortable for some folks. But exploring ways was one of the ways that we tried to keep that broad, because we recognize that it's not an easy solve. And we know that there's a lot of opportunities for us to have good discussions at the national level, at the state level, of how we can make sure that this information can be included and when's the right timing for it. And so as opposed to just saying, include automated designation in crash reports, we wanted to kind of go back a step and say, it might take some time for us to figure out what works for the DOT, what works for our partners, what works for DPS, the DMV as well. So, and then also what makes us compliant at the national level. So definitely some complicating factors. So tried to kind of bring them back just a step.
Exactly right. Other questions or thoughts on regulation and safety? And as people are thinking about that, I think I remember if the straw poll from previous meetings, safety ranked amongst the top as far as the poll responses, that this slide in particular was one of the top vote getters as far as the council. All right. Hearing no comments, I think we can move on to the next, which is economic development and business opportunity. Of course, we've talked about this a bit before in the grant discussion, but Minnesota, we want to say that we are open for business for both business and for testing, especially given our snow. So we've talked about unique use cases, snow, ice, cold weather, and then being able to say there are jobs, CAV-related careers, and be able to tell our youth about such things. And then upskilling, reskilling potentially for those who might be displaced by CAV. So any thoughts on essentially economic development and workforce preparation related to Minnesota and our unique use cases? All right. I will assume that the deafening silence is just overwhelming support of all the things that the group has decided here, which I guess is heartening. But
yeah, Damien, as we were preparing, we did say that we hope to have a robust discussion, but if we don't, then as long as it's overwhelming support, we'll be okay with that. So just make sure that if you do have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to make sure you're vocalizing those either in the chat or raise your hand and speak up. We want to make sure we're hearing from folks. So
please do. All right. Hearing none, I think we can move into the next, which is insurance and liability, to be able to talk about whether liability insurance policies should consider CAV. And this would be in the form of a working group and potentially establish a minimum financial liability for CAV testing. So being able to say that we are, I don't know if is that meant to be minimum financial liability or maximum financial liability? Hard to say.
Maybe we change that to establish financial liability requirements.
Got it. Yeah, I would guess that, yeah, that if we're looking to, well, I guess maybe not. I don't know. Just thinking about if we're saying that we're open for business, saying that you will be liable for at least this amount of money might not make us very attractive to testing.
Well, I would say this in the trucking industry, you can't operate without a minimum level of liability insurance, and you have to prove you have that minimum.
I see. So yeah, so I think, yeah, minimum amount of liability insurance is different than a minimum amount of liability. So I think, yeah, that's a good clarifying that.
Well, so I'm not sure where you're going, but I think the point is, I haven't been deep in this area with this team, but I mean, fundamentally is the state seeking protection for itself? Is the state seeking protection for all motorists? In a research environment versus a on-road environment. So I mean, I think those are the questions, but it's sort of like you want to make sure that who has the liability. It gets back to this when you're doing the testing. A, is there insurance? B, and whose insurance covers when things go wrong, right? Is that where we're going here?
Yeah, I think, yeah. So hearing your comments, I wonder if a friendly amendment to number 2 would be investigate establishing minimum financial liability coverage for CAV testing. I think that's probably the goal here, is to be able to say that if you are testing CAV, there should be a minimum amount of coverage to protect the public, I think is the idea with this. And anyone who's drafted this particular one can feel free to correct me on if my assumption is incorrect. Being a lawyer, I know that I'm afflicted, as many are, with wordsmithing. So any other objections on investigate establishing minimum financial liability coverage for financial CAV testing? And hearing none, I think we can move on to the next, which is cybersecurity, data privacy, and data governance. I'm the co-chair of this group along with Frank Dama, who's also on this call right now. Of course, with CAV comes data. There's about 2 terabytes of data that's being thrown off, for example, by a Tesla every day. So what data does Minnesota collect? What data does Minnesota not collect? And if we do collect things, how do we store that data? So because the co-chairs are lawyers, we tended to be more verbose than the other groups. Apologies for that. But largely, we're saying let's make sure that if we do collect data, we have security by design. That is, we think about security on the front end rather than after the fact. Determine best practices on how to encrypt and store these data. To determine what OEMs provide. That is, there are, Ford, Tesla, Toyota, et cetera, all have data that could be ingested. So what do they have? And then determine what we want and must collect. And then potentially if we need to update the Minnesota Data Privacy Act to relate to Minnesota needs these data. So here are the privacy protections related to the data we need. And then to be able to determine to what extent that CAV data can be shared. If the DOT collects data, can that be shared with the department, some law enforcement authorities, for example. So any thoughts or questions on cybersecurity, data privacy, and data governance? Looks like Danielle Elkins has her hand up.
I was just going to maybe add with all the other data specifications that are being created around CURB data with CDS, how do we make sure that this data is compatible with the other data specifications that are being created that are more linked with infrastructure?
I like it. I wonder if that would be another one with number 2, monitor best practices for data encryption, comma, security, comma, and standardization.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Great. I think that'd be a good friendly amendment.
Damian, would you mind saying that one more time?
Sure. Yeah, just adding essentially after data in number 2, after data encryption, comma, security, comma, and I think standardization.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep. Other thoughts on data security, data privacy, and data governance? And just as a co-chair, we've had we've met monthly over the last couple of years, and we've had some of the smartest privacy lawyers I've ever encountered talking about these issues, and including Representative Elkins, who has been very helpful in talking through these issues. So I would say that this committee has done great work on this side.
This is John. I will jump in from oh gosh, not quite how to say it, but I mean, I think it's going to be user permission to collect the data. I mean, the challenge is, well, if I buy a vehicle, am I signing checking off 3 boxes and I've just given away all my data forever? So there's one thing about which is the data, but then with that data, in theory, could only bad actors interact with my vehicle, but the government could tell me you can't drive. I mean, if it becomes a new source to say because of some other behavior, criminal behavior, you have a criminal warrant out for you, we're going to shut your car down. I don't know. I mean, we could just think of a bunch of others. So to me, it's sort of like the phone with wheels, right? Our phones right now are the ultimate tracking devices that law enforcement are now using to, follow up on people when they don't do good things. And I just want to make sure the citizenry is well aware of data that's being collected through vehicles and literally the ability to shut that vehicle down potentially remotely by potentially the government. It sounds a little dark, but I mean, we're on the very early parts of this. So let's make sure there's a call up to that, to what does that mean for personal data, personal agreement, and limiting the government's ability to use that in unintended ways. So I don't know if that was talked about at all.
It was. And first, thanks for that very insightful comment. And yes, everyone on the committee is very pro-privacy and really we've almost every meeting, I would say, addressed the concerns that you've talked about, that is protecting personal privacy and being able to ensure that there's no government overreach of personal privacy. I will say that there are lots of potential solutions to the problem you described. One potential solution we just discussed at our most recent meeting where the OEMs, the Teslas, the Toyotas, the Fords have the data. There are some companies that essentially are intermediaries to be able to collect the data from all the OEMs, and then Minnesota would be at the end of the chain. And so one method that might solve the problem you're talking about is that we as Minnesota would be able to say to the intermediary, here are the private data we need. For example, how many miles have been driven in the state, or how many miles have been driven, period, to be able to do road usage taxes, but do not give us any other data. So we as a state could be able to tell the intermediary, this is the data we want or do not want. And then even that intermediary would not keep necessarily all the personal private data that the OEMs would have. So anyway, so that's not the solution, it's a solution, and we'd be interested in other solutions, but that's largely the concern you had. Has it been at the forefront of all the discussions we've had, and the things you see on your screen right now are ways to potentially address that.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. And obviously you see the words data privacy and privacy protections. I mean, I think the right broad words are there, but since this is one of the more wordy slides, I wouldn't oppose a more robust call out for something like that, you know, that we all think we have data privacy till we don't. So what's a specific element that I don't have a good solution here, and I agree that you've covered it. And now, Steve, this is a big area, Representative Elkins, you think about, but am I making any sense?
Yeah, and I think looking at the blue on the left-hand side, the last words are bolstering privacy protections. So I wonder if that addresses the particular concern is that bolstering means, you know, increasing. So, you know, maybe we need to add more more robust ways to say that we are trying to protect, but maybe that will handle it. But Representative Elkins, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, as Damien's saying, we just within the last couple of months, we've had some amazing presenters in this committee talking about exactly this issue. And we've learned a tremendous amount about what the industry is already doing, and you know, how the data is you know, being made accessible in some cases through application programming interfaces. And so, John, you're absolutely right. I will be will be a strong area of focus for me in terms of developing legislation for next year, both generally and also looking at potential updates to the Data Practices Act. I mean, most of the stuff I think we're seeing right now is suggesting that most of the data that it would be useful doesn't need to be held by the state itself, because there are many intermediaries that are taking and processing this data. You know, and we like I have a bill, you know, establish mileage-based user charges on electric vehicles. And what we've learned so far is that there is no need for the state to ever know anything more than a car's odometer reading, and the data that the state receives can be filtered so that all it receives is odometer data. So this is an area that this particular committee is spending a lot of time understanding where the pitfalls are. You're going to see some really good work coming out of this committee over the next couple of months.
That's 100% right. And knowing that we don't have too much time, and maybe the last comment is that vendor number one is being sued by the California, where the user says that I, as a user, essentially could track my own location by using this vendor. That's vendor number one. And then vendor number two that spoke to our group said that they're avoiding the problems of vendor number one by not collecting that data in the first place, and therefore not passing that along to the end user. So anyway, so there are lots of potential ways to be able to solve John's problem, and we're investigating those. The problem that John identified, I should say, to clarify. Representative Elkins, is that a residual hand, or do you have other comments?
Oh, no, I thought I had taken it down. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem at all. Looks like Amber Backhouse has a question or her hand up.
Yep, no, thank you. I just wasn't sure then, have the manufacturers themselves been involved in this committee then? Do they have representation?
We have, I can't remember, early on, and so early in the formation of the committee, I think we've reached out to the OEMs, but the extent of, I guess, vendor participation we've had, like Representative Elkins said, the most recent was a vendor that worked with the OEMs to be able to collect the OEM data. So I would say arguably, and then the presentation before that was actually a large analysis of all the OEMs and all the data that they collect. And so I would say maybe even better than having an OEM in particular talk about their particular data they collect. We've actually had an overview of all the OEMs and the data that's collected and can be transferred to intermediaries and pushed to us. So that said, we'd welcome, you know, an OEM like Tesla or Waymo or whomever else to be able to talk through the data to collect. And if anyone on this in this group has contacts where they would be able to have an OEM talk to us, we would love that kind of discussion.
And
This is Patrick Weldon, Polaris.
Can I get going, Patrick? I wasn't done, Patrick.
Sorry.
I was just going to caution that just because they collect the data doesn't mean they're going to be willing to share it. And there have been pieces of legislation the past few years that have asked them to share certain things, and they have been adamantly opposed to doing so. So just a cautionary note, maybe before you think you'll be able to build something off of this, because I think they need to be bought in for this to work. And I'm not sure historically that's been the case. So.
Yeah, I think what you've identified is the data that the OEMs collect versus the data that Minnesota collects of that. That is, do we dip into the trough of OEM data? And I think that, even if they don't share that data, yeah, I guess that's there's a dichotomy between that.
I'll connect with you
go ahead.
offline, Amber, because we've learned a bunch of stuff that you might not be aware of.
That sounds good. I'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Great. And Patrick, go ahead.
Sorry about that little duplex on the phone. My apologies. I would love to see that presentation you talked about, where this third party sort of collected all the data that the OEMs actually bring together, or did I hear that wrong?
Yeah, there's a couple of, at least 2 players in the space, maybe more players in the space, but what they do is they build API interfaces for each of the OEMs to be able to connect with all of the OEMs and collect the data that they have from via API. And then anyway, so that's both the presentation where it discusses all the OEMs and I don't think we actually recorded the presentation, but at least the decks we'd be happy to share with the members of the group. So maybe I'd ask Thomas.
Thank you.
I can offer a little bit of a clarification on that. So what we've learned is that all of the OEMs are collecting data from just about all of their cars. 97% of the cars that are sold in the US this year will have both GPS units and cellular modems. The manufacturers are already hoovering that data up to their own data warehouses in the cloud. They have already developed application programming interfaces so that they can provide access to their customers to this data. And there are multiple firms that are leveraging that data, and mostly in conjunction with having access to the customer's credentials for accessing that data. That have the capability of accessing the data in the OEM data warehouses and providing it to customers. And there are OEMs that are selling their data to brokers as well. So there's a lot more going on in this space than most of us were aware of until about maybe a month or 2 ago. So.
That is exactly right. Looks like Frank Dahlman, the co-chair of this committee, has a question or a comment.
Yeah, thanks, Damien. And I had been 2-timing on meetings up until now, so I appreciate you running this. But as I dropped in, I'll just follow on Representative Elkin's comment there. Something that is we've come to understand in this group really is that there is more or less a right to privacy. It is also a transactional right, and so if one owns it, one can also sell it. And to the extent we're seeing data sharing, it is happening largely as private transactions. So there has been nothing in our group that has talked about the state mandating the sharing of data. Particularly data collected by private entities or private citizens. The bigger questions come in who actually does own that data, who has the right to collect it, who has the right to sell it. We're trying to get a better understanding of that. And that's, I think, where a lot of the direction is going. And our friends over in California, being a very influential part of the market, as well as a very active legislature in this area, are probably where the greatest action is that we'll just need to pay attention to see where things are going.
That's exactly right. I saw a flurry of thumbs ups, which might be a hint that we should perhaps move on to the next topic. But any other final thoughts on this slide before we move to the next? Hearing none, I think we can move to the next, which is land use and planning. We've talked as a group over the last several years about being able to determine research in modal trip choices and the ways that we could maybe use infrastructure to be able to figure out land use and planning. So how do we share research with local government, that is state plus local interaction, and then also research on how connected and automated vehicles might impact the land use and planning both in the state and federal level. So thoughts on, and this relates a bit, of course, to the infrastructure that we talked about earlier, but thoughts on land use and planning as it relates to CAV. Research, research, and more research. All right. Hearing none, I think we can move into the penultimate slide, which is public engagement and education. This builds upon the equity slide that we talked about earlier. This is a broad public engagement to be able to educate the public about CAV, both the benefits and potential ways that we're looking into ways that we might need to address, but essentially increase knowledge throughout the community by demos, by creating a CAV materials library and potentially doing a survey of the public to be able to talk about their apprehension or excitement about CAV. Any thoughts on engagement and education? All right, I think that pause was uncomfortable enough. We can move on to the final slide, which is talking about leadership and collaboration. This gets to the existential that part that we were talking about earlier. What are we going to be when we grow up? Does this group continue? And do we, if we do continue, what are the groups that are going to continue talking about and researching the areas that we've discussed over this past slide? So the recommendation is that we do continue the CAV Advisory Council and that we do continue the Innovation Alliance committees and that we do continue the interagency CAV team. That is, we do want to, we think that our work is not yet finished, as demonstrated by the previous slides, and that is the recommendation that we continue having leadership in this and collaboration on this. One aspect that both the smaller group and the larger groups have talked about is what is the outcome of our group? Are we looking to enact legislation, or at least recommend legislation to go forward? Are we looking to enact regulation on the DOT side? Are we looking just to share knowledge amongst the stakeholders? For example, the last 2 meetings on the data privacy have given us a wealth of information that we've been seeking over the last 2 years. So all the attendees of that data privacy now know and can take back to their constituents the ways that data is being shared. So anyway, so the question is, what is our goal? Is our goal to recommend legislation, to recommend regulation, to just share knowledge amongst us and to have a forum for such things, and maybe others? So thoughts on any of the above? And as people are thinking, I think one of the discussion points is, if nothing comes out of this, are we just a tree falling in the woods? I'd like to think we are not. That we are actually making sounds that might reverberate across the industry and across the government. But that's something we've been thinking about, and I'd be interested in others' thoughts. Looks like Danielle Elkins.
I was just going to add, I think all of the things in terms of helping us develop our regulations, our local ordinances, as well as state legislative changes that we need to change is really helpful to have this group to be able to kind of share ideas and vet what works in the public and private sector. I think the additional challenge that is coming up is, our first conversation today is there's all this federal funding coming. And for the most part, local government does not have the resources to be applying for this, and maybe even arguing that MnDOT is a little personnel strapped to be able to write these grant applications as well. So as much support as we can get from the private sector in going after this funding and supporting us in that is going to be really helpful for us, and just building out this ecosystem here in Minnesota as well. Like, we at local government, we know exactly what we need, but we have a really hard time finding people that actually provide the solutions to the problems that we have around this.
That's really helpful. Thoughts on local versus state. Thank you, Danielle Elkins. Other thoughts or questions on leadership and collaboration and our existential question? All right. Hearing none, I think we can move to the last slide, which is talking about the next steps, which I think, Tara, if I'm not mistaken, is your spot, or Thomas's?
That's correct. Yep, happy to cover it. Thanks, Damien. And thanks to the council for everybody chiming in, providing some comments. We'll work with the working group to finalize and incorporate those comments that we heard today and have them all fine-tuned here. So as we come into September, we'll have hopefully a finalized list of recommendations that we'll include in that executive report. So moving forward to those next steps. kind of just mentioned, we're going to work to finalize those recommendations here in the next month. We're going to be drafting an executive report in August. I wanted to just highlight what our initial thoughts are of what we will have in that content. So I think everyone had a chance to review the 2018 the 2018 executive report, because we've kind of touched base on it over the last 2-3 meetings now. But we want to have an introduction. The introduction will likely be pretty similar to what we've done for our annual report the last year, which will include a little bit of CAV background information about some basics and the importance to Minnesota, as well as explaining the council's purpose and the goals, what historically has been done, how long it's been around, and kind of what the intent is moving forward. We also want to have a summary of the 4 years of this council's work. So recognizing that a lot of stuff's happened, a lot of this, like Damien even mentioned, like the knowledge sharing. How do we document that and make sure that we acknowledge that there's been some really good conversations that we've had, some good opportunities for us to learn. And even though we might not have a new piece of policy that we've enacted, we are coming up with that roadmap of what we need to do to be prepared and get us to that. So we're going to work on summarizing that and summarizing the work of the last 4 years. Providing an update on those 2018 recommendations. So some of the recommendations, like we've already talked about at the last few meetings, we haven't taken substantial action on, but there's definitely a lot of work that we want to celebrate and note what actually has been done. Also, we want to provide some context on the recommendations and provide that summary of kind of where we are overall. And then jumping to the 2022 recommendations, share that we're trying to come up with a little bit more specific recommendations, things that we think will be a little bit more actionable. Note that they're the context of how the working group formulated them, trying to create fewer, more clear deliverables with those measurable actions. And then something we're also going to work on trying to include is identifying some lead owners. So we've talked about how the DOT and the CAVX office our role is to facilitate the council, but at the end of the day, we're not able to actually be the leaders of some of these challenging topics and some of these recommendations. So we know that we need to pull in partners from a number of different areas throughout the state. So if there's an opportunity for us to say, oh, we might have our partners in DPS be able to lead this specific action, our CAVX office can definitely help facilitate that still moving forward. But we want to recognize that there are some very key players that we want to make sure are in the room that will have a key role moving forward on that as well. And then the future of the Governor's Advisory Council. So Damien, as you mentioned, that last recommendation category is leadership and collaboration. We want to highlight that one specifically because we know that there's been a question of should the council continue, and we've made, I think, pretty clear. I think we had a couple questions and we want to make sure there's the clear purpose of the council. So we're going to expand on that and make sure that that recommendation is clearly articulated to the governor so that whether he ends up winning election or if we have a new governor come in, they can acknowledge the recommendation that you all have set forth, saying that there's incredible value for the work that you guys all have been doing. So in September, we will likely try to get to a point where we have this executive report that we can share prior to our September council. We can share it to the council and hopefully we can vote on it and approve it or make minor modifications to it. But our ultimate goal is to have that executive report submitted to the governor by October, so prior to the election. So that's just kind of the timeline we're working here towards, recognizing that we only meet one more time before we're looking at trying to have this submitted. So there probably will be some emails going back and forth. So do try to respond, or if you have some additional comments, even prior to the meeting in September, feel free to share those, as we are always happy to try to polish those up so that as we come to the meeting, as much as I want to have the discussions, if there's silence and during those pauses that Damien's able to help us provide, we're okay with that too, if it's all because we're in agreement and consensus on that. So just wanted to highlight the main deliverable we're really looking forward that the council is going to help us put together this year then is that 2022 executive report. So we'll also then, after that 2022 executive report is published, then we'll look at starting that 2022 annual report to highlight the work of this year's council as well. Any questions on that? Anyone feel like this timeline is not achievable or have any substantial concerns? All right. Well, thank you all again for your involvement, the working group specifically, Damien, Kyle, and Brett, as well as our commissioner and Jay for helping really fine tune those recommendations. And thank you for everyone for your comments today. Like I said, we'll get those incorporated and we'll keep you guys apprised if anything changes, but looks like we're moving forward and have some good support. So thanks everyone.
Yes, great discussion, and that was definitely the core item on today's agenda. So thank you all for the participation. I think it provides a lot of information for the committee to continue to refine, and then also be incorporated as Tara just outlined. With that, we're gonna start going into a few topics that'll be a little bit shorter in duration. And the first is the Drive Minnesota update, which Phil previewed at the introduction to today's meeting. And so I will have Tara provide a little bit more information about that project, including its goals and purpose. And then Gina and Phil will give more information about the route and the events and how data will be collected and analyzed. And then there'll be opportunity for questions and discussion at the end.
Thank you, Ben. So yeah, Phil, as he welcomed us today in our meeting, kind of alluded to the update that we're providing here. And we're really excited to share this with the council. This has been an idea that was spearheaded out of the Outreach and Education Committee, and then collaborating with the Infrastructure Investment Committee, recognizing a way for us to really look at our infrastructure that we have. How is it working with current technology, and where are the opportunities for us to maybe engage with some policymakers around the state as well? So you can go to the next slide here, Thomas. I just wanted to share the overall purpose. Like I mentioned, it's overall CAV infrastructure and policy readiness are what we're looking at. And with that, we're really trying to engage with transportation professionals and policymakers. So we've talked a lot about engagement over the last 4 years. And one of the things we've heard from the legislature is that the general public needs to be informed, but also some policymakers need a little bit more information as well. And so we saw this as a great opportunity to be strategic about going around the state, introducing policymakers at all levels of government to this type of to the technology that's out there on the roads today, to give them kind of a little bit of a basic understanding of what we're working with and what might they think about for their own communities. And so as we look at this, we're partnering with the University of Minnesota CTS, Bolton and Mank, as well as VSI Labs for this effort. And we really want to make sure we're just giving people an opportunity to learn as we're learning about our own infrastructure as well. So there's 3 elements to this project that I just want to highlight, and then Phil and then Gina will give a little bit more details about the specifics. But the first aspect is the drive component. So we're really looking at 4 days of driving in August. At the first slide, I noted the dates, so August 15th through 18th, and we'll provide more information for folks on the specific locations, but we'll do 4 days of driving on roads of different functional classes. Primarily trunk highways, because we're using trunk highway dollars, so we are limited as a DOT of what we get to spend our money on. But we're going to be looking at how the vehicles that are traveling on these roads interact with the infrastructure. So the vehicles will be equipped to gather data along different types of road. We'll be on specific routes that we know have specific infrastructure questions we want to learn more about. And then we'll be able to assess how the CAV vehicles interact with each other and other vehicles and infrastructure along the route. Another major component is the engagement aspect, so the events. We're going to meet with stakeholders. Like I mentioned, transportation professionals and policymakers are a key audience. Even though general public will be allowed at the event, we're not necessarily focusing on them as the key audience. We'll do a short demonstration where Phil and our CTS partners will be able to showcase a little bit about their vehicles, talk about the technology that the way automated driving assist systems pick up information and use it. And then we'll also provide some information on what Minnesota's been doing. So talk about our CAV guiding principles, the CAV Governor's Advisory Council, and other things, so that folks understand that if they want to get involved, there are ways for our local partners to get more involved as well. And then the last aspect is, our findings and recommendations. So what are we going to do with this? So we're going to be working with Phil's team as well as the Bolton and Mank team to write a final report, provide all the vehicle data, tell us about the information that we learned. What are the things that maybe we need to take action on? One of my favorite questions I get from local agencies is, what should I be investing in today from an infrastructure standpoint for CAV? And it's a very, very hard question to answer, because we don't always know what's working best. This might give us a little bit more opportunity to provide some of that guidance to our partners. So we're pretty excited about that. So we're hoping that we can take action after this as well. It's not just a one and done one-off project, but we'll have some good opportunities for some next steps moving forward. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Phil, and he's going to give a little bit more about some of the data collection and the part of the project he's running. And then I think Gina will provide some information about the events that we'll be hosting as well.
Thank you, Tara. Yeah, this is really interesting. Let me give you a little background on how this was born. several years ago, Utah DOT came to VSI Labs and they said, we want you to do a demonstration in our state, okay, in the interest of promoting CAV, okay? And the part of one thing they wanted was us to literally traverse the entire state in automated driving mode, you know, and I said, well, first of all, I don't think that's even possible. And I would venture to say that there's not a single state in the union where you could literally traverse the state now in automated driving without a disengagement. The fact of the matter is, there's a big gap in terms of what is available versus what these cars are capable of doing. At least half the cars are sold with forward-facing cameras today. By the end of this decade, nearly every vehicle being sold will have level 2 automated driving features. This does not mean it's a driverless car. However, it's a car that's loaded with safety and ADAS and convenience features like its ability to, drive itself either within the context of the lane or within the context of the road segment. So anyway, Utah, one thing led to another, and it was like, okay, well, why don't we do this then? Let's both drive it and then do an assessment at the same time. So that led to a process that evaluates the compatibility of roadways against emerging ADAS and AD automated driving technologies. By the way, that's what the industry calls it now, ADAS/AD, and that's everything up to level 3, basically. So that's what's in cars or coming to cars today. So what we do with our survey is we examine how road segments perform when using, the current technology. And to support this, we've developed both a survey methodology and a data processing pipeline that produces these actionable insights. Next slide. Okay, this just visualizes the process. So it starts with data collection, and all of our vehicles now have the ability to record. In fact, I mentioned to the committees many times before that often testing is done through collected data, where you're operating in shadow mode, and then you can do everything offline to really further evaluate how your vehicles are interacting with the infrastructure. So once the data is collected and managed and partitioned and so forth, it gets uploaded to AWS where it stays forever. It never comes back until it's deleted. It's just so much data that you can't even work with it on a computer. But if you use cloud resources, you can use this data, and we can post-process this by running multiple lane detector algorithms on these recorded data sets. And then basically what it does is it calls out areas where performance declined or where safety became an issue that would have resulted in a disengagement, either automatically or a requested disengagement or a complete shutdown for that matter. A given segment of road, let's say, if it's interstate highway and it's 100 miles, there might be 5, 6, 7 areas that would be called out. It's called an item. An item has a geocoded start and stop, and the viewer tool allows the agency then to pull up each of these segments, drop them right in the middle of 400 frames, and you can click forward, backward, and see exactly what's going on. So that's the process. Next. Some common scenarios, for example, that are problematic. And incidentally, our survey, we have about 35 categories in all. Common scenarios are on-ramps and off-ramps. For those on this call that have some self-driving, you know what I'm talking about here. When you get to let's say it's an on-ramp and you don't have a dashed line, you get the inevitable wiggle to where the vehicle shake or it just wiggles. It's not particularly dangerous. It's just annoying. Now, an off-ramp, however, can be more precarious. An off-ramp without a dashed marker, the vehicle, depending on the slope, if there's a slope, if there's a curve, whatever, can inadvertently take an off-ramp. Okay, then it starts to raise some safety flags for sure. Non-traditional intersections are always challenging. Roundabouts, basically right now, roundabouts are not safe for automated driving systems on the road. It doesn't mean you can't do them, but I wouldn't. Okay. Now, if it's a robotaxi or an urban deployment or even a shuttle for that matter, it's going to be recorded and have a virtual rail, so it'll follow a roundabout just fine. But non-traditional intersections, the list goes on and on. Ghost markings are a huge problem. And speaking of trucking, there was a situation in Iowa about a year ago where a couple of 3 18-wheelers went off the road. One of them claimed it was their ADAS, which led them off the road, and we were called in to take a look at it. Well, there was a ghost marking that was the culprit here. A ghost marking from a previous construction site that caused the ADAS, the lane keep assist system, to put the vehicle way too close to the pavement's edge. Okay, work zones. We all know that's very, very problematic. Work zones are not safe for automated driving unless we get some real. Obviously, if there was ever a place for Vita X, this is it. So you got to give the vehicle a heads up on this. So next one. And some of the other observations that we have learned as researchers, that limited contrast is probably the biggest culprit against concrete surfaces, wet surfaces, and so forth. Spacing and gaps causes these boundary conditions, as I talked about earlier. Geometry and slope, decreasing radius turns, for example, coupled with a slope. It limits the look ahead range of the vehicle, and that can mess it up. Of course, lane scars, rumble strips, surface material changes, and of course, everything above is exacerbated with environmental conditions, obviously. And what I also like to say is, generally speaking, what works are a couple things. First of all, regarding weather, if it's bad enough where a human can't handle it, a pretty good chance the computer can't handle it either. Okay. Visible cameras are visible cameras. If you can't see it, they can't see it. So it's as simple as that. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm not going to read them, but these are item categories that get called out. So yeah, we're very excited to bring this this methodology to our Drive Minnesota, and it will give us, rather than just out doing a tour, it will give us actionable insight that at least might have a little impact on all of our cause here. So I think that's it, probably. I'm not sure exactly what I sent you. Oh, here we go. A couple more in here. I take snippets all the time because we're crisscrossing the country just continuously, and I like to capture things that stand out. I-80 in Wyoming, for example, this is what I consider pretty much perfect, a perfect 10. You've got the tiger tail lane markings, which improves contrast, and then the off-ramp is a dashed, fully marked, dashed off-ramp. That's a good example. I cite I-75, Northern Michigan. If you've driven up toward Mackinac Island, it's beautiful up there, as we all know. They've done a terrific job, especially at night. They've switched to 8-inch material, and the computer really likes 8-inch material, especially those gores that just pop here like that. So next. That may be it, actually. Okay, yeah. Back to you, Tara.
All right, Gina, it's all you.
Great, thank you. Before I do, John Houselotten has his hand up, so maybe we could address, John, your question or comment first.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe this can wait to the end, Phil, but it's more of this is really cool. It's amazing to see sort of I'm going to call it the post-production work that you can do. I am curious, how are commercial fleets in the Southwest being able to essentially do live fire now, you know, automated delivery. I would be curious at the end of this talk to get your insight, because they've had to have done some of this stuff in advance. So if you could respond to that, but I can wait till Gina's done.
Sounds good, John.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so Phil provided a good overview about the information that we're going to be collecting. And by the way, just from a university standpoint, this project is an outstanding opportunity. I mean, very rarely would we have the opportunity to gather over 1,000 miles of data that can be used. So the value of this project isn't just for you know, the end result for this particular project, but the research, I think there's great opportunity for it to inform other projects and research questions moving forward. So we're really excited to be part of the team on this and to lead the team for the project. So this shows you the generally the basic route that we're going to be covering. So over, like I said, over 1,000 miles over 4 days. So we will be departing from the Twin Cities and we'll be moving through St. Cloud up to Duluth, Bemidji, Moorhead, Marshall, Mankato, Winona, and then back to the Twin Cities. And I just wanted to also clarify. So the legs that you're seeing here aren't the actual legs. So we'll be veering. We just wanted to sort of give you a general sense of the roadways that will be traversed, but the more detailed legs for each of these stops will look different. So the items that we took into account as we built the route between these destinations with feedback and support from the MnDOT CAV office include the pavement type. So we'll be looking at bituminous versus concrete roads. So trying to get a good representation of those. Functional classification of the road. So is it a local road or is it a collector? Is it a minor or a principal arterial? So that's a factor that we're taking into consideration. As Phil mentioned, we're looking at traffic control treatments. So signals and stop signs. Can we find some roundabouts that we can go through? Some of these reduced conflict intersections like J-turns. Really trying to see how the vehicles will perform as they're driving through some of these particular traffic control treatments. Number of lanes will primarily be on 2 and 4 lane roads, but we will hit some 6 and 8 lane roads when we're in some of the metro areas as we complete the drive. We'll be looking at sun glare versus normal driving conditions. So as we head west, we'll be looking to do some of those legs during the evening to see how, and then in the morning to see how the sun impacts the performance of the technology. And we can't order rain, but we may, over 4 days in Minnesota in August, we may very well encounter rain. So that will give us a serendipitous opportunity to see how the infrastructure and the vehicles perform during that type of a situation. And then we'll also, as Phil mentioned, we will be, so we're searching out construction zones and work zones to again see how the vehicles will perform, and some of that may mean slight alterations of the leg depending on when road construction is happening, either through MnDOT or the cities or counties that we're traversing through. So I think if we could go to the next slide, thank you. So this is the tentative timing. So I think our timing might again be adjusted. We're allowing time for the vehicles obviously to travel and then to get set up, but we plan to have these events at each of the major stops, and I'll show you in a minute. We'll talk a little bit more about who we're inviting and how we want to market these these events, but we'll be starting in St. Cloud. So on day one, we leave Phil's shop and head to St. Cloud. And then from there, we'll go to, from St. Cloud after that event, we'll go up to Duluth, hold the event, and then the team will drive from Duluth to Bemidji and overnight in Bemidji. We'll start out with our event in the morning at Bemidji, and then head over to Moorhead, and then again from at the end of the day, drive from Moorhead down to Marshall, overnight in Marshall, and then we'll move on to Mankato on day 3, hold our afternoon event there, and then conclude at overnight in Winona. Our day 4 will be in Winona, and then heading up to the Twin Cities. Our hope is to have this at the University of Minnesota. We're working out details, kind of the closing metro area stop. We hope to have at the university. We're looking at some other backup options as well. But at the university, we see this as an opportunity again to really highlight to our community, but also to the metro area this work and what's been learned so far on the drive. So I think we could go to the next slide. So thank you. So for each of the events, we want to have a broad invitation list that we'll be sending the information to. So we'll be looking at obviously our legislators and our congressional delegations, likely get staff from there, but that's great. We think it's important that they participate as well. Obviously our host city and county, so we'll be inviting their key staff, but also their elected officials, so mayors and city council members, county commissioners, and then we're looking at having about a 40-mile radius of the surrounding cities, townships, and counties that would be invited to each site. Obviously MnDOT district staff. We'll look at the planning organization, so the MPOs that are covered or that are situated in each of those cities. We'll reach out through the county engineers and the city engineers organizations. Of course, this group is welcome to participate in any and all. So if you feel like a road trip, you're welcome to participate in any and all of the events. And then, of course, we'll also be inviting the Innovation Alliance committees. So before I move on to my next slide, I just invite any questions or comments about the invitation list. Are there groups that we're missing? Are there entities that you think should be included in each of these invitations? So welcome any comments from the group on that.
Hi, this is Ryan. Can we include the transit providers in this invite plan as well? Like St. Cloud Metro Bus, Rochester Public Transit, Duluth Transit, etc.
So yes, we can. They were not a sort of a primary audience, but yes, we are certainly able to do that and can add them to the list. Any
Gina,
other comments?
one thing I was going to note too, I think we were saying that for each of the events, we'd be looking at probably within, was it about a 1-hour radius of travel? That we would invite additional cities, townships, counties, so maybe the additional transit providers and such as well. So kind of recognizing like we're not expecting folks to drive 4 hours to go to the nearest event. So some of our cities and counties will hear of this, even if it's going to be further away. But from the actual surrounding cities, townships, and counties that we'll be inviting, it'll be kind of focusing on a little bit more of those that are a little closer.
Great, thanks, Tara.
Looks like Todd has a question here, Gina. You want to answer that?
Okay, how many vehicles will be traveling and are electric vehicles being used? There will be two research vehicles, I think, and then there'll be an additional staff vehicle that'll be going as well. Phil, I'll let you answer the question about your vehicle in terms of electric vehicles. The university's is it's actually a hybrid electric vehicle, so it's not a 100% electric vehicle.
Yeah. Same with us. Ours are hybrid electric as well. Yeah. And you couldn't do what we do without either a hybrid or an EV. Okay. And it's got to do with the way our vehicles, they're by-wire vehicles. And so they talk directly to the actuators. So steering, throttle, and brake, but they're by-wire. They're both hybrid vehicles that get the job done.
Yeah, I mean, they are on our wish list at the university is an opportunity to so when we purchase I'm optimistic when we purchase our next research vehicle, we would like it to be fully electric. Tina, do you had a question?
Thanks, Gina. No, it was just another group to think about inviting, and that would be the unions that represent the workers that are in the transit, the transportation industry. Just a thought, to be inclusive, invite them up front, maybe like the AFL-CIO or, the St. Paul labor union. I mean, there's just like a couple that maybe just to extend an invitation so that because I know that they have angst about this new technology and how it might displace some of their workers.
Thanks for the suggestion. Any other comments about the invitation list or groups to consider inviting? Okay. Next slide, please. So these are our next steps. So, when we first started planning this, we thought, oh, we've got a lot of time here, but now we're down into the crunch time of the last 2 months. So we will be over the next 2 months focusing on finalizing our locations and our logistics. We're working with the CAVX office to make sure that we have representatives from MnDOT to participate in each of the events. And then as confirming the route and developing our presentation content, we're going to actually conduct a dry run of what the event will look like so that we make sure we have our timing and logistics all set before we head out onto the road. And then the actual drive, as we've mentioned, is the August 15th through the 18th. We will then take the months of sort of the rest of August and most of September and October to create our report. So there will be a final report that's available as well as a presentation. So our team will also be developing a presentation with highlights from the project. And then our intention after that is to look for opportunities to share the findings with this council, obviously, as well as the Innovation Alliance committees and other organizations that have an interest in the findings from the project. So Tara, I'll turn it back to you to see if there are any other questions or comments, but I think that's it from the team.
Thank you, Gina, and thank you, Phil. And John, can we go back to what question you had earlier about trucking in the Southwest?
Well, it's sort of twofold because Phil and I were having a little conversation. So I'm trying to understand for this Minnesota project, will the data that is being collected apply to like a Class 8 commercial truck? I'm thinking just where sensors are located on vehicles and what they see and read. So that's one question. And it sort of leads to, and how is this actually being done live fire in other states already?
Let me say this, and you're right, we have had this side chat going, but Class 8, all commercial vehicles that are on the road are using the same technologies that you find in the light vehicle segment. Same sensors, same algorithms, same processors, and so forth. In the VSI research vehicle, as well as the U of M research vehicle, we do mount the sensors up high. Okay, so we are gaining a very good perspective. Our survey is equally applicable to Class 8 as it is to light vehicles. The only thing that it would be great if we could use a Class 8 vehicle to do this survey work, but we definitely have to charge a lot more than $100 a mile if that's the case. just to pay for the fuel, of course. And I would need a CDL.
Understand. And then how is this essentially being done live fire now in like Arizona, Texas with Class 8 trucks?
Well, you know, a few years ago, we had Darren Anderson from TxDOT as a guest. We should invite him back to give us an update, because that was at the start of all of the work being done in Texas. And now here they are 3 years into it. And I just saw Darren a month ago, and they're doing it. And how are they doing? Darren said they're just doing it. They still have safety drivers, so they're not breaking a law, but they're using I think SH 130 is one of their routes that they do a lot of testing on. That's that tollway, that high-speed tollway that runs from Austin to San Antonio. That's a popular test area. So they're doing it in obviously Texas, Arizona, and a few other places in the Southwest, but they're not doing it without a safety driver.
Thank you.
Yep.
And Tina, do you still have your hand up, or is that from previous?
Sorry, it must be from previous. I can't even see that I still have it up. Sorry.
Not a problem.
Oh.
Any other questions or discussion about Drive Minnesota? So I do just want to highlight, as Gina mentioned, Governor Advisory Council members, Innovation Alliance Committee members will all be invited. So we will be sending out invitations here in about the next month. So you should see those come in your email box. We'll be looking to have folks register if possible, so we get an idea of head count, make sure we have enough space. The goal is to host these all outside, weather permitting, but we also recognize that it's going to be hot. So we're hoping to have some backup options in maintenance garages. So kind of limited on what we might be able to provide from an actual how many attendees can attend and stuff. So just kind of keep that in mind. But if you do have questions, you want to be involved, we are always happy to bring more people onto the team. So. All right. Well, I think we can move on then. Thank you, Gina, and thank you, Phil. I think Thomas is up next, and he's going to give us an update on the CAV website redesign. So.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. I just want to provide a quick update on some of the work that's been happening regarding our CAV website redesign. So over the last few months, a team with MnDOT and HDI have been working on a website redesign. This redesign suggestion came out of our messaging and engagement guidance that has been presented to you all at a previous meeting. And really this redesign is needed due to the current website over time, becoming unorganized, kind of trying to meet.
You sound really kind of patchy. Is that just me, or is that for everyone?
I think it might be for everyone. Thomas, are you able to try disconnecting your headset and seeing if that helps? Thanks for bringing that to our attention, John.
Is any better?
Say it one more time.
Is this any better, or is it still patchy?
Much better.
It's better.
Okay.
Thanks, Thomas.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that heads up, John. Yeah, so as I was saying, this redesign is needed due to our current website over time becoming unorganized and trying to meet too many audiences at once, and it'd be challenging for folks to find information. So what I'm going to do here is just pull up. We have been working on a mock website design for a new website, and just looking for some high-level thoughts you have on the concept, the structure, and layout of this website. You'll see a lot of the wording on the website is just filler text, so don't need to be looking at the specific content, as that's still being developed, and the Education Outreach Innovation Alliance Committee is helping with some of that work. So really just looking at the structure and will this website meet your needs, any high-level feedback you have. So let's quickly go through the mock website and the format we're looking for the new website. Are folks able to see the mock website pulled up?
We can, Thomas. You might want to zoom in just a hair though, too.
All right, so what we have here, the website will be this initial landing page that will look like a standard MnDOT website that has just some basic information on connected automated vehicles and our CAVX office. And you'll see that there'll be two sub-sites that folks can go into depending on what information they're looking for, kind of with two different intended audiences. So on the left-hand side here, this learn more about CAV in Minnesota. This is more intended for the public. And then on the right, the planning tools and partnership resources, that'd be more for CAV partners. So people who are familiar with CAV and kind of in the CAV industry. So this is what the public website focus will look like. So you'll see here on the far right, there is links to the different sections of the website. The scroll here to show kind of what we're thinking, and feel free to jump in with any questions or comments as I go through the site briefly here. So just some basic information about connected automated vehicles, some option for engagement, ability to highlight some CAV projects going on throughout the state, even with a map that could show some of our projects, like our different pilot shuttle projects going on throughout the state, so folks can learn more about that. Be able to include some photos of different CAV technology and projects. That basic CAV 101 information for the public and folks who are trying to learn more about CAV. Then some key information about why CAV is important, looking at these 4 different buckets of areas that we're wanting to focus on with CAV. So safety, equity, innovation, and the economy. And as you'll notice here throughout the website, there's these links to learn more. So I'll have some basic information. And if folks want to dive in deeper, let's say safety, they can click on this link and take them to a safety specific page to learn more. At the bottom would just be some additional information, some call to action if they want to sign up for our newsletter or get involved, some additional information there. And then jumping to the partnerships website. So this is one I'm particularly interested in your feedback on, as most of you on the call would fall into this partnership category. So really seeing if this website design would meet your needs when you're looking for any information about CAV in Minnesota. So similarly, on the right-hand side, you have the ability to jump to a specific section of the website, and then it would scroll through those sections as well. So it's basic information about CAV in Minnesota with some links to key documents such as the 2022 executive report that we discussed earlier in the meeting today. Information on upcoming meetings and events, so things like Drive Minnesota could be highlighted here, or other events that folks might be interested in participating in. And then we have core CAV content for different audiences. So once again, looking for any thoughts you have, are these the correct buckets of audiences that we want to provide specific information for? And the Education Outreach Committee is currently working on developing this content for these specific audiences. So currently we have local agencies, other Minnesota state agencies, industry and businesses, other states and countries, advocacy groups, and elected officials. So if anyone has thoughts that these are the correct different content buckets, or if there's anything different or changes that we suggest we should make, happy to hear that. And there could also be information on the key working groups that we have in CAV, so the Governor's Advisory Council, Interagency CAV Team, and Innovation Alliance. Information on funding and frequently asked questions, so our CAV Challenge or other funding opportunities. And finally, there'd be some tools and resources such as our messaging engagement guidance and other tools and resources that are under development for folks to use. And once again, it would end with some information on how to get involved or sign up for our newsletter. So last thing I'll show is just an example. Like I mentioned, if you click on one of these learn more links, it would jump you to a specific page. And those pages would look something like this that would have specific information for that topic. So I'll pause here and see if there's any initial thoughts or feedback. We're hoping to have this website launched kind of late summer, early fall. So still working through iterations here of the site, but wanted to get this in front of you all in case you had any feedback before we continue to move forward.
Thank you, Thomas. So just a quick question. Anyone feel free to maybe just raise your hand or give us a thumbs up as a reaction here. Anyone actually check out our current website in the last month? All right, we got one. Got Gina. So I'm just going to take that as there's definitely some opportunities for improvement we recognized. So if you do have a chance to take a look at it, maybe over the next week or so, let us know if there's something you think that is so great on there that you want to make sure that we continue to make sure we include. If there's something on there that you're like, this is more information than is necessary, that's incredibly helpful. If there's missing information, one of the things that we've recognized is over the last 4 years of our office being established, we've put a lot of information up there, and it's gotten to the point where it's a little disorganized to make sure that the information that John might want, for trucking information and partnership opportunities might be very different than what the general public is looking for. And so we're trying to really find that balance between there. So if you do have any ideas, opportunities, or feedback for us, we are always happy to hear that. I'll also note as the team continues to move forward with development of this, there's always going to be opportunities for us to make modifications. So feel free to make sure you share and reach out to us if you're hearing from other partners, other friends, family members that are checking out the website too. We are happy to hear from them too. So, John, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I do. I just have a question. So is this meant to be the site that is the repository and covers all the functions of CAV for MnDOT? Or is this, and is this meant to be if I'm a citizen and I'm curious that this is where I go?
I'd say yes. So I think that it is both, where it does have that MnDOT information on what is going on with CAV and kind of broadly throughout the state, not just MnDOT, what our partners are doing along CAV. And then there would be that public specific site for folks who are wanting information on CAV. They can access that site and learn more about connected automated vehicles.
Okay, because we're going through a project internally here, developing a career workforce hub and digital campaign. So we've been hearing proposals from marketing firms. So I've been kind of thick into this. And my question is, and I realize this could be a separate piece, and we have an outreach committee of the Alliance, but this feels very functional, looks very good, very clean. I have no question it clearly covers what we're doing. But from an outward sort of non-insider market trying to learn more about this doesn't feel very consumer friendly. It doesn't feel very curious. It doesn't feel very targeted to audiences that are like going to be early adapters. So if that's a whole nother initiative and website, I get that, but that's just my general. So there's nothing wrong with it. But if it's how do we advance interest, curiosity, this is a good repository, but it looks very governmental, if that's the way I would say it. If that's the intent, it's great. So I'm not, just some immediate feedback.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback, John. That's really helpful. Yeah, it's trying to strike that balance of it being a MnDOT site, but still being able to spark that interest of folks who may want to be early adopters or learn about CAV. So yeah, thanks for that feedback. Other thoughts? All right, well, as I mentioned, look for new CAV site coming later this summer, early fall.
All right, thanks, Thomas. Jumping in, I wanted to provide some updates on CAVX projects, but as opposed to just jumping into some of the projects we've been working on, I wanted to follow up on a question that Councilmember Patrick Weldon and Councilmember Brett Weiss were asking about a little bit more, wanting to understand how CAVX, the MnDOT CAVX office, selects different projects that we move forward here for the state of Minnesota. So I first wanted to just note a few things, and the first one is that one of the things that MnDOT has to be very mindful of is the way we use our funding. It does have limitations. Our CAVX office is completely funded through trunk highway funding. So anything that we do has to be trunk highway eligible. There's guidance on what that means. And so we want to be very judicious about following that to make sure that we don't fall outside of it. But typically it means it has to have a trunk highway benefit. How are we applying something that maybe we're learning not on a trunk highway to true trunk highways as well? So there are some substantial limitations, but at the end of the day, we still have to make sure that we are focused on trunk highway benefits. So I wanted to highlight a couple of program funding opportunities that we have within our office. The first one is CAV Challenge. Pretty sure a lot of you have already probably been pretty familiar with that. That's probably one of the most prominent programs we have that has dedicated funding every year where proposers can bring forward different projects that they think will help solve today's or tomorrow's transportation challenges using emerging transportation technologies with connected and automated vehicles. It's a great way for us to hear from industry about some opportunities that are addressing some of the goals and the challenges that the council set forward, that MnDOT set forward, and that our CAV office has set forward. Some of the highlights of those projects, our Med City Mover project, our White Bear Lake project, those are all coming through the CAV Challenge, as well as a number of different projects that are looking at more some research to implementation types of projects as well. Another program I wanted to highlight is our Innovative Ideas project or program. This we do a request for proposals for the Innovative Ideas program, and proposers can put forward projects that are in a similar vein of addressing CAV, in a similar vein to the CAV Challenge program, but addressing more ITS related issues that we're seeing on our system. So that's another program that we move forward with every year. A couple projects that we're working on right now are understanding the flashing yellow arrow and the safety components of that, as well as a passive pedestrian detection system at intersections of our signals on our roadways. So definitely some interesting opportunities for us to explore and learn a little bit more about. We also have our ITS district solicitation. So CAVX office funds different infrastructure funding that is related to ITS. So oftentimes we look at if there's fiber connectivity needs for ITS, as that's the backbone of our system, looking at DMS messaging signs, and a number of other different ITS components as well. We have the ability to do direct select with different consultants that we have on approved lists already through our master contract. And we'll actually be doing a new list of that here coming later this summer, where we'll be adding to or renewing a contract with a number of different consultants that could be on that master list in a number of different categories. That allows us often to make it easier to move forward with different projects that sometimes the council or the Innovation Alliance committees have ideas with, or have ideas for us to move forward. So it's a great way for us to use our reputable and established relationships we already have. And then lastly, we can do requests for proposals. So we haven't done a whole lot of those as of recent, but that's something we're hoping to move forward with, particularly as we start to learn a lot more, put those lessons learned into next step plans, things that we want to look at exploring and understanding how we can best prepare our state from the information that we've already learned over the last 4 years. So those are some of the programs that we run and that we how we select a lot of our projects. Next slide, Thomas. And then one thing I also wanted to highlight, and I see that Commissioner Daubenberger's on as well, so I'll just note that Commissioner Daubenberger, if you'd like to hop in at any point too, to share some of your thoughts on this, feel free. But one of the challenges that we often see from the CAVX program is that we're really trying to balance all three of these programs, or all three of these different silos of goals. First and foremost, we serve MnDOT. We have the three goals that I wanted to highlight from our strategic operating plan are customer trust, really engaging with customers, building that understanding, making sure we're communicating about our projects, and cultivating a transportation sector in Minnesota that serves the communities or that reflects the communities that we serve. And then we also have operational excellence. We want to make sure we're building and operating, maintaining a system that works for all people, demonstrating that this works out throughout the entire state and adapting to those challenges and opportunities throughout the state. And then workforce excellence, achieving and maintaining a diverse workforce to ensure that all employees can reach their full potential, and attracting and retaining workforce as well. So those are 3 areas that MnDOT's really focused on. And then I highlighted 5 areas in specific that the CAV office has identified as goals. And you'll see that they are very similar to some of the things that the council's already identified. But again, this is very DOT focused, very trunk highway eligible focused as well. So we have partnerships and collaboration, research development, deployment, communication, education and outreach, policy planning, and then accessibility and connectivity. So within each of those, we have some specific objectives we're trying to achieve. And quite frankly, there's a lot of overlap between that work and the council as well. And then I have highlighted the 5 specific goal areas that the council established. I think it was 2020 or 2019 maybe, with regards to when you guys kicked off your work. And in these areas, we want to make sure that we're striving to move forward. But quite frankly, we know that the DOT and the CAVX office cannot be responsible to move all of these initiatives forward because of some of those limitations on funding. So I want to pause there, see if there's any questions, and then also see if Commissioner Daubenberger wanted to add any additional comments as well.
And Tara, maybe I'll just go ahead and jump in now if that's okay. But hello, everyone. Sorry that I joined the meeting late today due to another conflict. But just one thing I wanted to impress upon here, and Tara did hit on this, of course, but the council goals that have been shaped really do then inform and shape what our CAV office's goals are, which align with MnDOT. So there's definitely alignment throughout here. So these are not, as Tara said, these are not siloed goals. There is alignment throughout these 3 different areas. And the CAV office's goals are MnDOT's goals, but they are shaped and informed by the council. So even though graphically we have it, kind of divided out here to see how it kind of fits together side by side, they're really all in alignment, and that's what we've been striving for here. But yeah, I would be curious with any questions that are out there.
All right, well, if there are none at this point, that is totally okay. But if anybody does have any that come up later, feel free to reach out to myself. Always happy to share either email or even meet in person to kind of go through this a little bit more, because it can definitely be a little bit confusing sometimes, and happy to make sure folks understand. All right. As Thomas moves to that next slide of upcoming events, one thing I just wanted to note is 2 different projects that I do want to give just quick updates on. We have 2 new demonstration projects that are moving forward here this summer. We have a shuttle project in White Bear Lake that we're really excited. It's going to be connecting communities that serve older populations and people with disabilities, and being able to connect to the YMCA. So it's a partnership with the city of White Bear Lake, New Tracks, and AECOM. And they're looking at having a launch here, hopefully in July or August. So early August is what we're really anticipating, being able to do a public launch. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully before our next meeting, we'll be able to celebrate that. And we'll make sure that the council's informed of that launch, and they can be invited to that as well. And then we have another project that we actually just were able to get executed in a contract that's going to be taking place in Grand Rapids. And Thomas, I know since you're the project manager of that project, do you want to just give a few highlights on that? Since that has a little bit of a different flair compared to the Med City Mover shuttle project in Rochester, and then the Navia Bear Tracks project in White Bear Lake.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as Tara mentioned, this project will be taking place in Grand Rapids. So we'll be our first project in a rural community here. So very excited about that. And a big focus of this project is accessibility. This project is partnering with the City of Grand Rapids, also the Plum Catalyst, and May Mobility are some key partners that we have. So May Mobility will be the technology provider. We'll have 5 vehicles that are Toyota Siennas that are automated. So this is a little bit different. It'll be a point-to-point on-demand pilot that will be happening. So people can use either an app on their phone or call into a call center to request a ride, and there's a variety of areas at about 12 miles of roadway that people can access throughout the city of Grand Rapids. So very exciting project that we're hoping to launch in September.
Thank you, Thomas. I'm sure we'll have some updates at the council meetings on both those projects. So if folks do have more questions or want to learn more, feel free to reach out to us as well. All right, so then just to highlight the upcoming events that we have here on the screen, we'll have one of our employees, I think Thomas actually is the employee, he's going to be out in California here in July, presenting at the Automated Road Transportation Symposium at a number of different events. So great opportunity for us to highlight what Minnesota is doing. I think there's 3 or so different sessions that we've been invited to present on. Want to make sure, again, we got that Drive Minnesota drilled into folks' heads that August 15th through 18th. It's going to be a great opportunity. So if we're coming to a town near you or you want to come meet us along the way, let us know. And it'll be fun to hear your guys' thoughts and be able to interact with a number of different folks, including elected officials and transportation professionals. And then lastly, I wanted to make sure that folks saw that our next council meeting, we did switch from September 21st to September 28th. So from 8:30 to 10:30. So you should have seen an email meeting invitation get changed for yesterday. For that, we recognize that the ITS World Congress, as Phil mentioned earlier, is going to be held in California this year. And a number of folks from our council have expressed that they plan on attending. And so we wanted to make sure that our next council meeting in September was a little bit easier for folks to attend. So hopefully September 28th works for folks. And we're excited to bring forward that hopefully that draft executive report and be able to share it and hopefully formalize it to move forward to the governor. I think that is it for comments or for our upcoming events. Ben, so I'll hand it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Tara. And we'll now go into kind of the final portions of the agenda, and that leads us to the public comment period. So if you are a guest at today's meeting, a member of the public who would like to comment on anything CAV related or anything that came up in today's meeting, go ahead and raise your hand using the raise hand feature or type in the chat box and I'll be able to call on you. And I have not seen anything in advance. So I'll kind of open it up for a minute or two and please jump in. And if I'll have a couple, I'll make sure to have a last call so we know everybody had an opportunity to use this time if you would like. So with that, anybody who would like to use this time? Okay, Joan, go ahead.
Okay, get me off the mute. Yes, Joan Wilshire, and I'm with my own consulting organization, Wilshire Consulting, and definitely I want to throw out there as we're looking to the group is looking to apply for grants and etc. to always keep this in your mind of putting in more data and so forth on the disability and accessibility angle, especially when we're talking equity, because that gets overlooked so many times. When we talk equity, we generally, it's generally not thought of, disability doesn't come up first and foremost, and it should. So there's so many pieces in there, and I don't have time and we don't to get into it all now, but certainly much of what we were talking about today, I would put out the angle of disability. There's not many states doing it. And so I would encourage Minnesota here to be the leader in the disability angle for accessibility and equity. So I think I'll leave it at that and give you lots to think about and how disability can be a huge angle for the state of Minnesota and CAV.
Thanks, Joan.
You're welcome.
Ben, it looks like Gina has a comment regarding CAV Camp.
Go ahead, Gina.
Yeah, thanks. I wasn't sure if this was the right time to mention it or not, but just wanted to let this group know that we are hosting again in August. So actually the week before the Drive Minnesota event, the university will be hosting the CAV Career Pathways Camp. So that is for up to 20 students who are going to be in grades 10 through 12 this coming year. We do still have we do still have a few spaces available. So if you know of any students who are in that age range who might be interested in participating in a week-long camp, please reach out to me and I can provide the information for the camp. We're really excited about it, and a number of organizations and individuals who are on this call today are helping us get the program organized. So really excited, and we'll be happy to share how things go with this group if you're interested later on. So thanks.
And Gina, can you remind us, is there a cost associated with attending CAV camp?
Very good point, Tara. So due to our sponsors and the support that we have, there is no cost to students to participate. We receive funding through the Federal Highway Administration. CTS contributes funding, and then we have a couple of organizations who donated resources this year. So the Minnesota Transportation Conference Steering Committee donated $5,000 to us for the camp. And we also received a donation from Six Sensor Intelligence. Their company has also donated funding and is providing content for the camp.
Thanks, Gina.
Yeah, thanks, Gina. So Joan, I see your hand is still raised. I don't know if you have a follow-up. Okay, it might just be that it was kept up. Yep, no worries. And then John, I'll come back to you for people who are members of the council, just to make sure that we get members of the public this opportunity, but I will come to you in just a moment. Joan, your hand's raised again?
Nope, sorry.
Okay, it's okay. Okay. Anybody else want to use this opportunity for public comment? Okay, well, while we're waiting, I'll turn to you, John, and then I'll have another call for public comment. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, thank you. I just maybe connecting a couple dots with the conversation and the Minnesota Drive initiative with the car in the summer, and linking it to our Minnesota brand winter challenge and freight. It's like I see a road show in January with a truck doing the same thing. In terms of, that would be a unique opportunity to do the same thing with a Class 8 truck, focusing maybe on more of the freight corridors, distribution centers, and then using an actual Class 8 truck and having the sensors placed the way they are. That maybe hasn't been done exactly that way in a northern climate. I understand, Phil, the truck is costly, the fuel's costly, and you got to have a driver to do the CDL, but just want to plant the seed as we're thinking about ideas.
That's a great idea. I would fully support that. Yeah, you would definitely raise awareness for sure among that community, the commercial automated community, for sure.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, John, and I'm sure there can be more conversations about that idea. Okay, so I think we're coming to a point where I'm going to have the final call for public comment. Anybody who would like to use this opportunity? All right, I'm not hearing or seeing any. So what I will do is, I believe we're now at our closing. So I will have our co-chairs close the meeting for us.
And Ben, before you do that, I'm just going to jump in and give one more quick announcement before Commissioner and Phil give that closing, if that's okay. So one thing we did talk about at our last meeting that we were hoping to cover at this meeting, but had a little bit too much content. So I wanted to let folks know that we still do want to discuss with the council how you want to connect with communities experiencing transportation barriers. That's one specific responsibility that's called out for the council to move forward with, that's in the executive order. And so we still want to make some headway on that here with the last couple meetings we have. So I just want you to keep an eye out in the summary that we send, and then we'll probably send another email out over the next couple weeks. We'll be asking the council members to help us identify specific communities or specific persons to connect with and to invite to future council meetings. So there's an opportunity for us to figure out how we want to best do that strategically. And then also we want to have a conversation and better understand what we think the purpose of the council is for connecting with different communities is, and then the desired outcomes that you wish to achieve. So hopefully we can start to formulate that via some email conversation. And then maybe that might be something we can bring forward in either the September or December meeting. So just wanted to give folks a little heads up on that. And then I just want to note too, our next meeting will be September 28th. So please make sure you have that correct on your calendar. For those that are not council members or are not ex officio members, you will not receive an invitation specifically, but all that information and the meeting invitation will be available in both our newsletter that will go out in a couple months, as well as it will be on our website. And then lastly, I wanted to note I will not be at that meeting as I will be out on leave back in September. And also we do expect to have a new director for the CAV office named here, hopefully either later this week or next week. So stay tuned on that too. And that might be something that we're able to include in our meeting summary. So excited to have that information be able to be shared. And now I will turn it over to Phil and Commissioner Dobbenberger. So thank you.
Thank you, Tara. I'll start, Commissioner, and you can have the final words then. This was a terrific meeting. I think everybody, I feel like these meetings are becoming more meaningful, succinct, they're better planned, we're getting greater participation. And furthermore, we've got some really great ideas. The innovation groups, as I said early on, have provided tremendous support to our advisory council. I don't think we could do this without them. And so clearly that's working very well. Happy to be part of Drive Minnesota. Looking forward to working with everyone on that. It's going to be quite the road show. Just besides our two research vehicles, I can imagine I know a lot of people want to go along, so it's going to be a convoy, I think. And heck, if we want to put a truck in that convoy, maybe we can just pull that off, but or at a future date at least. That's a great idea, John. This all applies very, very applicable to the commercial trucking segment. So anyway, the website looks great. It can't be all things to all people, but I think it's optimized for key stakeholders. I think that's probably priority one. And it's informative to the general public as well. So it sure feels like we're doing everything we need to do to keep Minnesota on the top of the list as far as when it comes to states that are embracing, supporting, and planning for connected and automated vehicles. So until next time, everyone, I'll turn it over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you for leading off the meeting and chairing the meeting for me. I only got to catch this last 30, 35 minutes of it, so regret that. But one thing I did miss out on that I was really looking forward to the discussion on were the recommendations. And so, Phil, I want to thank you for being a part of the work group that was put together to develop those recommendations. So I was in on the first meeting of the work group, great discussions. So Phil and Brett Weiss, Kyle Shelton, Damian Ryle, thank you so much for all your work on that. And then to the council for the discussion on that today. And again, I look forward to getting the recap from Tara and Thomas on that. Maybe one other thing I'm going to throw out there is, since we only have a couple more meetings this year and things are taking a little different direction now with the pandemic, going more toward that endemic, I would be interested to know, and I think what we could just do is a call out after the meeting, but who would be interested in getting together like we did pre-COVID? So back then, we also had the virtual option for those who couldn't attend the meeting in person, or for those who would prefer to not attend it in person, we would definitely want to make that virtual option available. However, I think if we have enough people who would be interested to get together in person for the meeting, we'd certainly do that down in MnDOT's basement level conference room called the Tech Center. We'd be happy to host it there again, as opposed to all virtual like we've done over the last couple of years now. So maybe we'll just do a little call out after the meeting and find out, do we have enough to go ahead and host it that way? And again, a virtual option with that. So thanks everybody so much for the discussion today, your continued work on this council. And with that, I think we can go ahead and wrap.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for your attendance. Meeting is adjourned.
Well, that didn't work.